Welcome back to the Long Way Home. I'm your host, Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're taking a little detour on the long way home. I have a list of topics that I've been going off of, and I'm gonna be picking that list of topics apart and going through over the next few weeks. I've got things like religion and politics and all the things you're not supposed to talk about. Those things coming up specifically about some of the stuff I grew up with, and all of this usually falls in line with what my life growing up and things, my observations of like present day things versus when I was a kid and that kind of stuff. So that's where I usually tend to go with these topics. This one, though, is going to be a little bit different, I guess, but not completely different. Different in the fact that I've talked about things like life and death before. I've talked about life events and that kind of thing. I've mentioned how in July of 2023 I was in the hospital and nearly died with a blood infection and that kind of stuff. But this year in particular, the last couple of years really have kind of hit a little bit differently. And when I say that, I think about. So I made a post on Facebook not long ago, uh, talking specifically about like the past couple of years and everything, because I don't try to think too much about what I've had to overcome and what kind of life events have hit and happened and that kind of thing. And realistically, like uh, since May of 2022, when I was laid off from the job that I was working at, like life has been like all over the place. And there's just been so much that I've had to get through on a regular basis, from health issues to technical issues with the computer going down and family issues, but all of that, and then amongst all that, doing school and trying to do this and writing, and there's just a million things going on. But all of that really recently came to like almost a complete halt, because in June or early June or mid June actually, my son wound up in the hospital, and that was following he got sick in late May and seemed like an upper respiratory thing. I thought it was a cold or something like that. But after a couple of weeks, when it wasn't getting better, and then he got like shortness of breath, and I'm like, okay, something's not right here. So my wife took him to CVS, and they did the minute clinic, and they were like, yeah, he needs to go to the ER. There's something really wrong. Turned out that he had pneumonia. What we found out in the long run was he had pneumonia as a result of strep throat. It started as strep throat, became pneumonia, and fluid had filled his lungs and had filled his chest and collapsed one of his lungs. And it was the scariest moment of our lives because we thought we were going to lose him. And that was kind of the time where things took a stop. I was in the hospital with him for 2 weeks. I wanted to make sure I was there the entire time. So I was sitting there and thinking. I had a lot of time to really go over like what all has happened in the past couple of years and how things have changed and morphed for me since really I started this whole online venture thing in 2021, really. And it seems like the 2020s have just been like shit. The 2010s were okay, but you hit 2020 and the pandemic happened, and I think that's been the case for like everybody. And I've got a friend of mine that he wanted to help me out. He started a GoFundMe for everything we were going through because like I went from driving about 300 miles a month to just in the 2 weeks that my son was in the hospital, we went over 1,200, 1,300 miles back and forth to the hospital every single day, twice a day. Like it was a lot. Not to mention food at the hospital and like everything that was there. It was a lot. Okay. So he wanted to help out, and I was talking to him about it after he started the GoFundMe, and we got a lot of people helped out, which that was amazing, and that's a whole nother topic at some point. But we were talking. He's like, I've seen a lot of people in the past few years that just things have just been going to shit for everybody. It seems like, and that's why like I don't dwell too much on it. I don't throw a pity party for myself because I have that perspective of like, I'm not the only one going through hell. Like, it's a pretty common thing for a lot of people. And I think about it in the context of the where my wife works. Like last December, around Christmas time, one of her friends that she works with lost her husband. Out of the blue, her husband, he got sick and he died. Not old, I think he's in his 40s. So like that happened. And then somebody else that she worked with actually did lose her son in an accident involving, he wound up drowning. And it's like, okay, so everybody seems like they're going through shit. And what is it about this decade? What is going on? And is it different? you know, are we doing this to ourselves? Are we like just bringing so much negativity and forcing it on ourselves? Like, what exactly is going on? And it kind of gets into the cause and effect of everything. And it gets into like decisions that are made. Why are decisions made? Why do we do the things that we do? Because if you just think about it, I mean, even go back to the pandemic. And if we had made decisions differently, if a few people had chosen not to travel back and forth between China and the United States, who knows what could have gone differently. Specifically, though, when you think about like the people in charge and the decisions that were made at the top and how it was handled, if things had been done differently, the pandemic might not have shut everything down. We might not have been in the situation that we're in, and you think about that stuff, and it's like, okay, if this had happened differently, if this had happened differently, you know, is it because we're just collectively making really bad decisions? Like as a society, is it that we are deciding to do things that are detrimental to us as a whole? Or is it just, the randomness of the universe? I'm not a religious person. I don't believe in a God, and we'll get to that in a future episode. So I don't think that is what's, I don't think that there's like some God up there like toying with us, or some evil Satan or devil or whatever doing things to harm us. I truly think that this is one of those times that, and maybe it's not that things are much worse or harder for most people. Maybe it's really that we're just seeing more of it. With the rise of social media in the past 15 years, even 20 years, you think about like where we were and how often you would have actually seen or known about bad things people were going through versus today, where, I mean, you see it all over the place. You see it on the news constantly. You see it on social media when people are posting their updates. And it's kind of a shift because, originally with social media, it was like all the good things all the time. And all you ever saw was the high points of people's lives. And you still see that to an extent. But I think you see a lot more of the low times and the bad things that people are going through. It's almost like it's a competition sometimes, where you see somebody say, well, I'm going through this bad time, and then somebody else has to one up them. Well, my time is even worse. Not realizing that like it's all relative. You can't compare your worst day to somebody else's worst day, because you have your own. You can only look at things from your own perspective. I've talked about this before with people that I know, and that in personal conversations. But like when I think of my worst day at work, would be filling sandbags in Iraq, or I've got that perspective. Whereas somebody who maybe has only worked in the professional world, their worst day at work might be, they had a bad presentation. And just because to me a bad presentation isn't a bad thing doesn't mean to them that's not a terrible thing to go through. So, and that's probably not the best example in the world, but like you get what I mean. When you look at things from other people's perspectives, you can't one up each other. You shouldn't be trying to one up each other with tragedy, especially. It's one thing to try to one up each other with, a friend went on, if you had a Facebook friend that went on vacation to the Bahamas, so you went up them and went on vacation to, Tahiti or something. I don't know. Like that's one thing. When you're trying to one up people for tragedies and bad things they're going through, and that starts to feel because it's a pity thing. It's the same reason that people will fake cancer, will fake tragedies to try and get that attention, to get that pity. A lot of times it's not even for the money. They might have a GoFundMe. They might just have a Facebook post about how terrible something has. Or YouTube videos. You've seen YouTubers that have like faked cancer or faked, um, losing a child, a miscarriage, that kind of thing, just for clout, for attention. And it's like, why? But also, is that part of what's causing it to look like things are much worse than they really are for a lot of people? Is it a matter of people are just sitting around like trying to find ways to make things worse? you know, I try to keep personally perspective. I shared what was going on with my son and everything online because it was an outlet for me, and it wound up, a lot of people were able to, when it decided to chip in. I can't even begin to express the gratitude that I have for the people that reached out and chipped in and helped us out during that time because it really upended our lives. And I think that, but I try not to post too much stuff like that. I try not to go because honestly, we've been through so much in the past couple of years. Like it makes my head spin when I really do sit down and think about it, you know. And like I said, I made that post on Facebook, and it was like I was writing down all this stuff, and I'm like, holy shit, we've been through a lot. And I try not to think about it on most cases, like I said, because a lot of people have been through a lot worse. And no, it's not a competition, and I'm not trying to upplay, I guess, my stuff, but I'm also trying to be realistic of like things could be a lot worse. I when I got back from Iraq, I went through I had survivor's guilt, and survivor's guilt is basically when you've been through a tragedy, you've been through a situation where you should have been the one to die, or you feel like you should have been the one to die, or you feel like it's not fair that like I felt like it wasn't fair. I got to come home when people that I served with didn't, and so I have that perspective to kind of look at things. But at the end of the day, it was okay. Things aren't that bad for me. I did make it back. And I think that's where I started to kind of realize that, you know what, I really need to start trying to look at life a little bit differently. And it's been a long journey. It's been a hard journey. And I still struggle with it at times today when I'm like, this isn't fair. Why am I going through this? This sucks. But I've made a conscious effort and I've been working hard to realize that things aren't as bad as they feel sometimes. And that for me is like I'm overcoming. I have a struggle with depression and anxiety as part of my Asperger's. So it's all overcoming all of that stuff, but being aware of it and knowing what works for me, what doesn't work for me is something that I've had to focus on. And especially recently, especially the last couple of years with the way things have gone, when I got laid off, I could have been like, oh, it's the end of the world. But, and with the help of others too, it's not like I've been doing this all alone, My wife was like, well, I'll go to work. You focus on this other thing that you want to do, and we'll figure it out. And that's what we've been doing for 2 years now. We have been working to figure it out. There's still ways to go. We've still got a lot to do, and we've still got, things that we're working on. But rather than focusing on the negative, I found the positive. When I was in the hospital last summer, I used that as a tool for some of my writing. I used that as like a lesson and try to figure out, okay, what can I do differently? So it's one thing after another, and just figuring out, and it's been helpful to have people. Not everybody's lucky enough to have people. I don't have that many people. I can't say that I've got a huge support structure, but I've got enough of a support structure to help me through it. If it weren't for my wife, if it weren't for my kids, if it weren't for a couple of friends, like things would be a lot different for me. And I know that. On the other hand, if I had a bigger support structure, things probably wouldn't be as hard as they are sometimes. So it's always a trade-off. But it's something I just really wanted to get it out there and talk about it because, for one, there's been some shifts and some changes lately. I've been trying to get this podcast out on a weekly basis. I missed a week, but trying to get back up there and trying to record and get some more episodes out. But I missed that week because I had that 2 weeks of sitting in the hospital and trying to figure out what's next. Where do we go from here? And one of the scariest moments of my entire life. Thankfully, we came out on the other side and we're doing better. He's recovering still, but we're in a much better place than we were when we were in the hospital. So but I had that and got backed up in school. I've had had a finance course that I was trying to complete. I absolutely hate finance. At some point, one of these podcasts, one of these days, I'm going to talk about the use of terminology in fields where it's not necessary. That's going to be a difficult one to. I'm going to have to do some research. And I'm going to have to come up with some specific examples because right now all I can say is, there's times where you use terminology in finance, for instance, that just isn't necessary, but they do it because it makes them sound smart, right? But that's another topic for another day. This one was just to kind of get out there and talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's been going on, why it's frustrating, and how frustrating it is to be sitting there and realize that, like, everybody's going through shit. And I wish I had a solution. Like, I wish I had some kind of an answer for why everybody seems to be going through this stuff, a solid thing. But that's just the way that the world works. It's the way that life is in general. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And the best you can do is focus on the good days, get through the bad days, and make the best of it. That's all any of us can really do. So I do want to thank you all for listening. I think that's going to probably do it for this one. I do, like I said, try to release these every single week. I'm getting into that habit, trying to. My goal is to do a year or a complete year with missing as few weeks as possible with this podcast, because it's consistency and it's getting it out there. And honestly, I know that nobody's really probably listening right now. There's a couple of you out there. There's a couple of people I know that will probably listen, but for the most part, like, this isn't being shown to anybody. YouTube's not promoting my podcast, and I'm not paying for that. Screw that. But so this is more for me than anything else. And maybe anybody that finds it helpful in some way, shape, or form. If you're one of those people that maybe this is your first time listening and you made it this far in, thank you. Mostly on YouTube here. I've got it over on Patreon, my website. You can always listen to the podcast on the website. So that's all available there. But, like, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go listen to the other podcasts. Go listen to the horror stories, the legends and tales, all that kind of stuff. Maybe you'll find that you really enjoy it here. Maybe you find that you hate it, and you're 18, 20 minutes into a podcast, hate listening, I guess. Whatever the case may be. Thank you, either way. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.